the array tool. To get to your array tool, we'll go to the MoDOT main tools, and we'll go down close to the bottom, fourth to the last one, to your manipulate tools. Hold your left mouse button down, and we'll select number 7 that says array. In your construct array tool, you have 3 different methods. We have the rectangular, polar, and along path. I'll set it to rectangular for right now. You can define an angle depending on how many rows that you want, how many columns. Here's your spacing in between those, so if you want to change those out to whatever you need, that's where you would change that at. But to use the tool, first of all, you need to define the object that you want to array, and it does depend on where you selected that for your anchor point. And to demonstrate that, I'm just going to snap to the end of this box right here in the lower left hand corner. And so I'll snap to that to define my object, and now you'll notice it's going to say accept or reject. Where I snapped to that right there, that's where those boxes will be created, to that lower left hand corner right there. So if I accept it, it arrays that box that I defined, or whatever shape that I defined, from the point that I selected it from my original object. So that is kind of important whenever you do array it. So that's how the rectangular array works. I pan over, and this time I'll use my polar array. So I'll change my method from rectangular to polar. This one here will determine how many items will be arrayed as it goes around, depending on where you anchor it from. I'll just do it 8 times. Here's where you define whatever angle that you want. And then also you have this option that says rotate items. So on this example here, let's say we have this box and we want to rotate it around this circle. If we don't have that checked, it will array it around that circle, but it will not rotate that box going around it, or that rectangle. If I have that checked on, it'll rotate it as it goes around the circle, which I'll have it selected for this example. First of all, identify your object or your element that you want to array, and I'll use this rectangle here. Next, you define what anchor point or the center point for your array to be. So if I define it right here, that will be the center of my circle. It'll array it around that circle, or whatever point that I want to define. I'm just going to use the center of this circle as the example for this one, and I'll snap to the center of it. I'll left click to identify it, and you see that it arrays around that center point that I defined. So that's the construct array using the polar method. Now if I pan over and go to my last method, along path array. So I'll change my method to along path. Whenever I set it to along path, I actually have 3 different modes that I can define. I have number, distance, and both. If I set it to number, here's where you can define if I want to rotate, let's say, this filled circle around this exterior circle around here. I can define how many items will be placed as it goes around. Let's just do 10 for this example. I'll lock that in. I'm not going to worry about the rotate elements or rotate items, but you should know how that works if you do rotate around it. First of all, you identify your element, and I'll select this filled circle. Now it's going to say accept identify path that you want to go along, basically your start point. I'm going to start it at this point right here. And now you'll notice as I move my circle around, you'll see some white dots that go around it. That's where it's defining how many copies it's going to do, number 1, and also the spacing. As you move around, you'll see that spacing get bigger or smaller depending on how far that you go. So if I drop it off, let's say right here, you'll see it's going to place that filled circle 10 times depending on how far that I went. If I went back to my original start point, it would have went all the way around it, equally spaced, and put 10 of those out there. So that's what the mode of number does. If I do an undo, and this time I will set it to distance, and I'll set it to a distance of 3. And then I'll do the same thing. I'll identify my filled circle, I'll identify my start point or the object that I want to go around. And as you move your mouse around, you'll see that as I move around, you'll see that that white dot will show up depending on how far that I go. And then once I'm finished, if I know this is the point that I want to stop it at, I'll left click to drop it off, and you'll see that it's going to place it at every 3 feet around that circle. So that's if you had a defined distance to do that. And if I do an undo, this time I'll set it to both. So if I knew my distance, let's say it was 2 feet, and I want to do 15 copies of it, that's where you can define both of those values. So I'll identify my filled circle, number 1, identify my path, and also where I want to start it from, number 2. And as I go around, you'll see that those dots will automatically show up because you've defined your distance and you define how many copies that you want. So you'll left click to drop it off, and you'll see that it copied it 15 times at a distance of 2 feet. So that's what the construct array along path does with those 3 modes of number, distance, and both.